Hello, I am Seamless, and this is part 2 of today's How to Bass, where I will now explain to you the hows and whys of why this particular sound exists. The goals of this sound actually combine a couple of ideas that we were talking about throughout the most recent How to Basses. About the idea of making a bandpass bass, reinforcing the lows and highs while having the bandpass bass, and the idea of making a Reese with citrus using FM. This one's a bit different though, in that it's a bit simpler. The idea is to find the simple reasons as to how to make a sound, and this has to do with disassembling. We're going into the heart of the issue as to why a Reese is Reese and how that sound occurs in science. To do this, I'm going to open up a new citrus, and we're going to make not necessarily the same sound from scratch, but we're going to make relative sounds so that we can explain how Reeses are a thing. Okay, so your typical Reese. Let's go to default 2.5. This is a default that I created that has everything at 0.25, so I can play basses. So typical Reese, 2 saw waves. Let's make a saw wave, output, make another saw wave, output, but also create pitch difference. So we see a bunch of things when this happens. But what I see that's most important to my hearing a sound is the idea that it creates this phase difference. You can look up at the oscillator window, oscillator waveform here. And you can see the waveforms moving across each other, and that creates that phasey sound. Now, the other thing is that if we look at the meter here, you see that the level is actually increasing and decreasing. It increases when it's perfectly in phase, and then it decreases when it's perfectly out of phase. Or rather, as close as it's going to be to perfectly out of phase. They're not the same shapes in terms of in terms of size. They are obviously saw waves, but the period lengths are not the same, which means that the angles of the top peak and the bottom peak are going to be slightly different. So the frequencies don't all cancel out, but some of them do. Mostly the low end ones actually is what it turns out being. And when we look at the EQ, we can see some very interesting things about how this works. And so what happens here is there's rhythmic phase cancellation. That's the idea of how a Reese happens. So we're going to basically play with this idea of rhythmic cancellation of particular frequencies. If we were to distort it a lot, and then turn it down a little bit, accentuate the taking away frequencies as a result of phase cancellation. We can observe a pretty important fact, and the fact is that the primary rhythm that we're hearing is the result of the lowest frequency being canceled. There's some higher movement that's creating nifty phasing tones, but the primary rhythm of the Reese is the result of the fundamental tone. What can we do with this? Well, we can kind of verify this by turning them both to sine waves and watching basically the same as old. It's kind of a fascinating thing. And then also what we can do is we'll make them both the same pitch and make one of them a saw wave. My bad. I apologize to your ears. Let's put this before the wave shaper. And what we're doing here is we basically reinforce the low end of the saw wave. Why do we do that? Well, if I take one of these oscillators and I make them really low, like I had done in the original one, and then say FM the saw wave, let's actually just do the by itself. We're literally just automating basically the pitch up and down of the saw wave. And if we combine this with the sine wave, which is not being pitched at all, we get that interestingness. This creates a bit of a different phase cancellation. You notice the low end more or less stayed consistent. There was always some low end there, but everything else wasn't. It was moving around and causing weird kind of just impact. It's causing impact. And I find it to be very interesting. We can also do the opposite where we apply it to the sine wave. has basically the identical effect. It's the idea that one of them is moving away from the other. It's just literally the same result. However, because we're using citrus, you have the option of legalizing ring modulation. Now, why is this important? Well, as we discussed earlier about the basic Reese concept, the idea of the Reese and the rhythmic phase cancellation is that the lowest frequency is the one that gets canceled out. So, if we apply ring modulation, which is basically different but similar to amplitude modulation, it's more or less FM, but applied to volume instead of pitch. And so let's apply that to the sine wave. Suddenly we have rhythm. We have the rhythmic cancellation going on, but there's still also a smooth saw wave still happening. So we have basically the correct note of the correct pitch throughout. It's very solid, very stable. It's the right note. It's not detuned. It's not out of tune. It's the right note, but we still have the rhythmic cancellation. And that's very nice. That's very nice. Yes. And so that we could play with this. So let's go back to the main sound that we made. Right? So let's do that same thing. Let's turn off the FM here and go to RM and do the same thing. You even see it happen in the EQ. I might be thinking, why does that sound different than the other one? Well, it's because of the distortion, the bandpass, and also because I had the effects turned on to kind of mess with the saw wave frequencies. Note that I only have it on the saw wave frequency. That's because I want the higher frequencies to be affected, but not the low end. Now we can actually take that idea even further, the idea of only affecting the higher frequencies. And this is something that's taking advantage of Citrus's additive capabilities, which is why I brought up Harmor just now. So we're basically taking the idea of phase cancellation of the lowest fundamental tone to its like logical conclusion, and that is directly controlling the fundamental tone by itself. We can achieve this in Citrus very simply. If we right-click the waveform window here, we click convert shape to sine harmonics. Bam, and it does just what it sounds like it says it does. It builds a waveform out of sine harmonics, which is what all these things represent, individual sine waves. And they're arranged in such a fashion that it basically creates a saw wave. This is more or less what Harmor does to create its default saw wave patch, except it uses more harmonics, I believe. Now, what's cool about this is that we actually have direct control over what frequencies are being present in the waveform. As you can see, it's not quite perfect, but when we're distorting stuff, it's not super duper important. However, if I did something like this, I missed some. It has the exact same effect that it would have if you had an extremely sharp low pass filter. Let's go back to regular saw for sine harmonics. Now, the reason why that's important is because we can do the opposite. We can actually remove the bottom end of things, and it'll work just like a high pass. A note following perfect high pass. Now, what's awesome about this is that we can now turn on operator 2, which is just a sine wave. And now we have the full saw wave again. Only now, all the harmonics, basically, these are all harmonic partials, and the fundamental tone are separate, which we can control them individually. So let's do that RM thing again. Put it on operator 2. We're now directly controlling the level of the base fundamental tone. We could even do the FM business as well. Also, there's a thing in Harmor you could do. It's called the detuning, the harmonic detune, where you move the frequencies away from the fundamental, and you can do the exact same thing with Citrus here by just changing the pitch of the fundamentals of the harmonic partials. And it has the exact same effect as it would in Harmor, where it creates that little kind of Reese motion. You might be wondering to yourself, well, why does it do that? They're not phase canceling. Like you can't visibly see them phase cancel in the EQ. Well, that's because when you distort them, it creates a bit of high frequency action that wasn't there originally, and that will phase cancel, because when you distort a sine wave, just the base fundamental tone sine wave, it creates overtones, and those overtones are going to clash with the pitch change in the higher harmonics of the original saw wave, And then, of course, that's going to create overtones as well, and they're going to clash and whatever. And that's what creates the rhythmic phase cancellation of higher frequencies. So that's what's up with that. And that can just be very, very handy. Very, very handy indeed. It's also a lot of fun to get to FM a little bit of the higher frequencies and just watch it move around. That's very cool. And of course, throughout all of this, we have the ability to make sure the lowest bass tone is completely solid and the right note at all times, despite whatever the harmonics are doing, whatever the harmonic partials on the saw wave are doing, and whatever however fast it is, it's still the correct note. And that's extremely important for, making not neurofunk. It's not super duper important when you are making neurofunk, but this gets to be a lot of fun when you can screw around with it like that. And what's cool about this is that pretty much everything I've done here, except for the ring modulation related stuff, you can do with FM8. Also, except for the additive stuff. But the basic idea of FMing a saw wave by a sine, a very low pitch sine wave, it can be very well done with FM8 and also operator and Ableton. So that should not be difficult to figure out. If it is, I can't really help you with that because I don't know how Ableton works. Indeed, but today should have been interesting because we just basically delved into the heart of what causes a Reese to be a Reese and a whole bunch of ways to remake it, and it's in our own image. And it's a lot of fun. And then you distort everything because distortion is great. And the bandpassy business is pretty sweet too. I have it on good authority, the authority of my own experience, that making this particular bass and then resampling it sounds kind of good. So this is a good, pretty basic start sound for resampling. It's also a pretty decent sound in itself. This is very simple. It's very directed and purposeful. It is what it is, that kind of thing. So yeah, this project will be available in the description for you to mess around with. If you have any questions about any of this, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.